Okay, so this is a fairly rigid unit. I did a lot of work planning it to make it. Some of the comments that I had from Glenn about, so on Glenn's, I'll show you some pictures later of Glenn's unit. I was really taken by the fact that when you're doing segmented work and you're building up your segments, every time you put a row of open segments in, you really have to go over to the lathe and sand that down before you put your next level on. And if you've got a faceplate, a regular faceplate that threads onto a thing, you're threading it on, and then you've got an indexing problem to make sure it's in the same place at the same time all the time. And then you've got to take it over to your lathe. And so I thought I'd do mine a little bit differently and actually put in a chuck onto this. The beauty of this is, I don't know if I can actually show you on this, but let's see what happens if I come in here with this. Can we see that? Yeah. So there's a little mark etched into there. And that etching, I don't have it on here right now, but in this keyway right here will be a T-plate that comes in plexiglass that has an etch mark on it, and that will just lock on there, and you just do that and you're locked in, and you're indexed to your plate. So every time you take it on and put it back, it's absolutely indexed to the plate. I'm going to try and get right into the beef of this thing. So the way this works, we have several different rows here of holes. So we can do 48 segments, 60, 72, 120, and 144. And so you would start, you lay in your first segment, putting it there. This would drop, so if this was your plate on here, my screwdriver's gone, missing. So this would come down. And it seems like a lot of work to actually undo these things, to lower it and everything. But the fact is that when you go to put a segment in, you're going to be doing this. It's maybe going to take you an hour to put in all your segments if you're doing 144 segments, gluing them in. And so the idea is then, whatever your profile is that you've gone in and figure out how big your row is, etc. So the end of this ruler is exactly lined up to the center of your jig. If your row is supposed to start at 3 inches, you would just move this out to 3 inches and lock it in like so. And this would be it would be right on your plate, so your plate would be right there at the surface. You would put your segment right there, glue it down onto your plate. Your next segment, let's say we're doing 48s. So we would simply move this ahead to 48. And now your next segment comes in, butts into here, glues down onto your plate. So you can see how that sort of works. And you would move to your next one there. And you would keep going around and do all your 48. Now, your next row, you have to be halfway on that. Well, in Glenn's design of this plate, he conveniently has a half hole right there, which then automatically sets you up for your next, when you do your next row, it's going to line it up and put it in the right place. So that's how this thing sort of works. You just keep rotating this and using it as a pegboard, basically, to drop it in to get your next segment lined up. Now, the actual building of it. There's a lot to think about when you're building these things. First of all, this plate has to have a backer on it. So it's on a piece of MDF, and there is, gee, I didn't bring another one of these collars, but basically I had Trevor cut in a larger hole that indexes to the thread-on collar on the chuck. One of the things that I need to do on this, because there is, even though there's a nut on the bottom that holds all this together, to hold this into the plate, and I'll have to show you some pictures after of how that goes. But I really should drill a couple of holes into the end of that chuck, into the end of the ring, and put 2 pins in there, roll pins, like a 3/32 roll pin in there, so that can index right into the MDF, so it can't rotate at all. You can't actually, and I probably won't be able to get you in to see, but right down here is a set screw that runs into the, that lines up onto the plastic, but there's a little bit of play in that. So that's why I'm going to have to go in and put those pins in to really index it solid to it. So how do you get all this stuff lined up and perfect, so that, because these holes have to be absolutely in the center on your ring. So this is the ring that we use, the Lazy Susan bearing. You get it from the Lee Valley. It's a cast aluminum job. It has very, very little play in it. That being said, it is very hard to get this absolutely centered on this. And so what I ended up doing is I took a sheet of 1/4-inch ply, Baltic birch ply, put a hole in it, mounted it onto the lathe, and turned it so that it fit exactly the inside, using that center hole on a collet chuck, so that it had to be absolutely centered. Yes, Jim?
Would it have made sense to, when the plate was being numerically controlled, to create the mounting for that?
Well, but this plate goes onto this MDF plate.
Okay.
And this mounts onto the MDF plate.
Yeah.
So, so now I have a center hole on this with that plate. So then I mounted this onto my lathe, and I put a 1/4-inch hole on here. Then I made another little piece here, put a 1/4-inch hole and turned it on a mandrel, so that it's exactly the size. So this is a hollow shaft inside here. So that actually would go inside this collar, down inside here, and give me another lineup. And so then this lines up with that, and this, and this, and this this centers up on the collar on here, and then this ring then centers up on the bottom of this, and you're bolted all together. I'll show you some photographs of it. I took some photos as I did it. Even then, when I took my micrometer and measured, it wasn't perfect. It was a few hundredths of an inch out one way or the other. And so in the end, what I ended up doing was getting some 1.5-inch blocks of wood, mounting this upside down with my center in, and just took the micrometer and adjusted it and put those blocks of wood, clamped the wood so that it held this in exactly the right registration, so I could put the screws in, because every time you put a screw in, it would move it off one way or the other. So, and it was really precision work. It took hours to figure it out and get it lined up, and many false starts trying to get that thing to line up, because you absolutely have no room for any kind of error as you rotate this around. Those holes have to perfectly line up every time in there. The other thing that I thought was that I would go with an aluminum channel, which would give me a lot more rigidity than just trying to build a box. Now, Glenn gets around that by having actually sides come up here onto his box, and his arm actually mounts on one of those sides, which gives it a lot more rigidity. But I think you'd have a lot of trouble trying to make it as rigid as this without going to aluminum and an aluminum plate here to mount it down to. When these tubes were bought from Banggood, when they arrived, the milling, they weren't square enough on there, so I took it to a machinist friend and we milled these all square so that it would be absolutely perfect. What else can I say about this? So really the hardest part was to get this all centered up so that the center of this was lined up with this and the bearing was lined up with the center of this. That was the whole key, and it took me a while to figure out how to actually do that. Let's see if we can see some pictures here.
Shoot from this side.
You know, what's that?
You want to shoot from this side?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it in a minute. I just want to see if I can get this there. Let's do that. Let's see. It's not going to look very good, unfortunately.
Square off to it. It's not distorted.
Okay, so here we can see that center ring lined up there, and these blocks of wood going around. The blocks of wood were actually cut so that the edge of them would come just on the edge of the melamine when it was totally centered. So that helped also center it a bit. Even with the center rod going through, there was about, I don't know, 5/100ths of an inch of play in that whole thing. So, you know, having these blocks in there really helped to change that up. Excuse me.
Do you want a glass of water, Dave?
If I could, that would be great. Thanks.
When you're trying to do an alignment on a hole drilled in a piece of wood, it's just amazing you got it that close just by,
Yeah, this actually got really close. Like I say, it was about 5/100ths of an inch difference as you went around in it. So there's the shaft right there. Too bad that's in there. But the shaft going through, that kind of lines it all up and gets, and this was a really tight fit. That piece of plywood was a really tight fit inside the ring, so there wasn't any play there either.
is that disc remaining in there still?
No, it isn't. I took it out.
It's an alignment piece.
Yeah, it's an alignment piece. And if anybody wants to build one of these, I can give you this alignment piece to use.
Dave, would you
Yep.
happen to have a picture of an open segment piece? I'm sure there's some people.
Oh, you know what? I
You
can.
probably don't know what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I can probably pull something up on this. It's too bad the computer won't hook up to the damn screen. I will try and pull up something so that you can see what that looks like. I should have asked Gordon or Glenn to bring in a segmented piece, and I didn't. Sorry. Okay, let me get this down and get another one up.
Something like 6 pieces.
It's not very evident here, but that is the nut inside there. It's recessed into that MDF disc in there. That center alignment shaft also was used to line up the holes to cut in there, and the shaft. Yeah, it's too bad. It's so bad, that picture on the computer here. And I will put this all into the newsletter so that people can see the pictures a little bit better.
Gary, did you want to try zooming in just right into the screen?
I think it's because the screen is backlit, it may be causing part of the problem. Let's just see here. Which way to zoom in? There's zoom in.
Yeah. There you can almost see it. So there you can see the wooden block is right here. There's the hole in it. The nut, you can't hardly see the nut, but the nut is in there around it. We won't bother with that. That's just, well, there you can see the nut pretty well. So now that at this point the screws are in, that's all centered up, and then it was just to center it up onto this board. And again, this board also, I figured out the center of the board and drilled a 1/4-inch hole in that and used that to line up this so that it would be all lined up. There's also marks on the board which become guidelines that you use to line everything up. Anything else interesting here? This is the system that you use for this arm. These little right-angle brackets. So there's 4 of them altogether, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. That gives you your rigidity in the whole thing to keep that arm going. I left this arm extra long because I was thinking that if you ever wanted to use this as a way of putting you could have like a press piece on here that would actually put pressure down onto this. If you had another arm on this side, you could probably actually put some pressure on it if you needed to for gluing. Oh, damn. Oh, I know what I need to show you.
Gary, do we have Wi-Fi here?
No. Hop, skip, and jump does, the kids' place down the next one over.
Is that thing sensitive to pick up on it?
If you're at the far wall, yeah, that's it.
No. I don't know if you can get on there and get on the web and get a segmented turning off of the.
Well,
the site.
if you want, I can go down and get one of the books out of the library with some segmented stuff on it.
Yeah.
Do you want to just leave that on your
Sure.
screen?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm fine.
Yeah. So, one of the things about this tubing is that it does have some places that you could actually thread. And so I actually tapped in the ends of this, and then what you see here is 4 screws into the bottom of that aluminum plate, pulling that column all together. It's a 1/4 inch aluminum plate, fairly large, so it gives you lots of play, lots of rigidity. And let's see. There you can see how the threaded ends on that going in.
Those are pre-drilled, right?
It's
The holes are there, you have to tap them.
yes, the holes are there. You have to tap them.
What
Yeah.
size?
This is 6mm. Works for this one. It's metric. Actually, 1224 also works as well, but hard to find 1224 screws.
So that's a segmented vessel. You can see all the pieces are all glued to one another vertically and horizontally.
They have an
And if you
open
want an
segment?
open segmented one,
Perfect.
you can see where there's gaps between some of the segments. That's considered open segmented.
Yeah. Let's look at this one right here.
Okay, and there's a couple of jigs in there.
So here you can kind of see how they're setting up their open segments. And this is somebody's jig here. So that arm becomes a locator for this next block. And you have to keep gluing these blocks in one by one as you go through.
There's a Seg Easy plate in there too
Okay, yeah.
for doing the open segmented. It's white plastic.
Mhm.
It's a wedgie sled.
There it is, right there.
Yeah.
So this is the other way you could do. Oops, get that in there.
But there's right and right's left.
You can have a plate that actually puts in those segments, but it's tricky to take. For me, it seems tricky to use that to build up a vessel. I don't know if anybody, Gordon, what do you use when you do your open segments?
I use a little jig with an index plate that, instead of it being horizontal, it's vertical,
Oh,
which is the original way that they did it.
right.
You have to kind of hold your finger on the segment until the glue tacks so the segment drops off.
Right.
It's nowhere near as exact as that,
Uh-huh.
as what you have,
Uh-huh.
but I never bothered to make anything as big as what your machine will actually make.
Yeah, this is. I wanted to make something that would, be versatile for everybody to be able to have access
And
to.
I would love to see your blood pressure. When you finish an vessel that has 144 centimeters.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
When thing falls apart.
Yeah. I thought I would start out with 48. Yeah. All right. I don't want to bore you too much with this. I just want to see if there's anything else here that's really useful. Oh, yes. Okay, so this is Glenn's machine that he built. And so you can see it's basically the same plate. Now he has a threaded shaft here, and he uses just a faceplate on it. But then you've got to thread the plate off and thread the plate back on, and I thought I'd try and get away from that with the using the indexing plates. And this plate right here actually has a little notch in it that Glenn uses a pin to make sure that his faceplate is in the right orientation each time, so it goes in and locks it into that particular orientation.
Gary, can you zoom in on that a bit for us, please?
On which, the picture done?
Yeah, zoom in on the picture of, thank you.
Something like that? Or
Yeah,
more?
That's great, thanks very much.
And so he's also using a ruler like I'm using over here. Whoops. So that his ruler is this bottom ruler here, and that's just sort of for your segment to come into, and then this becomes your stop here for where the segment's going to line up. And then the top ruler is just, so the very center of this jig is right here on this.
There you are. Gotta find you.
Okay. I'm going to turn this a little bit like this so we can see it a little better. There. I put 4 bolts in that just because I wanted to make sure that it lined up and didn't rock. So if we were at, let's say that first row was the outside ring was going to be at 2 inches. So you would set that up. This would come down onto your plate, which I'll bring the plate up to it so you can see. But it would be right there. And you would glue your block onto here.
Is that bottom ruler used for measurement or just a metallic plate to guide?
Just a metallic plate to guide it.
Okay.
It just happened to be a ruler that had some holes already punched in it that I could use.
Made by NK, yeah. Mhm.
And it's stainless steel, and it's fairly rigid, so it's not going to move, but thin enough that it can fit into those. If I ever get to doing 144 segments, it'll fit in the gap on those bottom rows. Okay.
So if I'm reading this correct, you've got 2 chucks involved here.
Yes, I have
on
2.
On your machine, which stays there.
This stays there. That's there
And
forever.
the second one that lives on your lathe.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that makes a hell of a lot more sense. Okay.
Yeah, and so this plate then, so let's say I've got my bowl building out on this.
Right.
So I can easily, okay, so let me just close this up.
Okay, that all lines up. How do you clamp the various pieces down, or do you? Or
You don't actually use, you're holding, you're just putting glue on the 2 outside edges of the piece.
right.
And that because there's a gap in between,
And
right?
the glue tack. to
And
hold it.
the glue tacks and holds it there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and you go around. and you build your row. Now, once you've got your row done and the glue is set up, now you've got to take that off, put that onto the lathe, take a piece of plywood or something with a large square of sandpaper on.
Your 80 grit guy.
80 grit, yep. And push that onto it, make sure it's flat, put some pencil lines on, go at it again, just make sure all the pencil lines are off. And then you got your row ready for your next row to put on.
As my mom would say, that sounds like prison work.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to take a long time to do. Yeah.
Sell these things for a couple
Glenn
of
is telling me it often takes more than an hour to do one row, to get one row in.
But if you're going to do it,
But if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. And so this thing goes back on so easily. So you just have to find that mark that I put on there, wherever. The light isn't very good here. There it is. Line it up to your light, and it's that easy to line it up. And now you're indexed on your plate, and you would just you just go to your next hole, put it in. There you are, lined up for your next one. And just keep working it around.
Well, that chuck you got there, what's the threading on it? Will one, a regular lathe, or?
Yeah, yeah, so I had,
1 inch?
this is an old one that I had kicking around. It has interchangeable bushings in it. And so it's actually the bushing is what I'm using to hold it into there, and it's a one. The bushing that I'm using is a 1 inch 8 thread
Okay, so
on the inside. Yeah, yeah.
what would chuck like that be worth down here?
I think a brand new one like this from Nova is around $150, something like that. About that.
well, with one waste charge.
Yeah, but you can sometimes find these used for not too much money. Yeah, so I think that's probably all I can say about this. Oh, the other thing I should say is that once you start to build this up, I understand that you never want to, so you're going to eventually, as you get rows built up there, you're going to start to shape them on the inside. You never want to shape those last couple of rows, open segment rows that you've got on there, or they're going to go flying off. So those, like the last 3 rows maybe, that you've put on, don't touch those with a chisel because they'll just come off. But the ones down below are kind of being held in by the ones above. And any guidance from our 2 experts on how you handle those, getting those inside curves without losing pieces?
Yeah, high speed and a sharp tool and a steady hand.
That's a lot.
Nothing to it, is it?
You bring that down to one thing.
It is very discouraging when you take the time to glue in like 72 pieces and you touch a chisel on it and it peels them off in an instant. Don't ask me how I know.
Yeah.
I end up like the bottom 3 or 4 rows getting on, and then basically just doing it very lightly, even with sandpaper, to shape the first few layers, rather than touching a chisel on it, because they are very, very brittle.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is something that, even though it's maybe a third to half air, you do have to crank the speed up. Like if you're going to turn a bowl at 800, you don't turn an open segmented roller in there. It's probably gonna be double that speed. Because it has to be fast enough
Yeah.
with a sharp enough tool
Yeah.
to reduce as much friction as you can. So that's where the scary part is.
Yeah.
Because it starts to sound like an engine, because the wind going through.
Oh, the wind going through the holes, yeah, it would really whistle. Yeah.
You kind of think that you're Jimmy Clues doing one of his demos sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the wing bowl, we've got that on DVD, it sounds like a propeller engine.
It can, not necessarily.
Keep your fingers
Well, I don't want to doing any kind of work on my lathe with my one lathe. As soon as I open up the center of whatever I'm working on, the air is just sucked into there and blown out the sides like a fan. Like the core goes flying, any other chips go in there, get thrown out the sides. Do you get the same effect from the turning? Because there's holes
You have
in
to
there,
ask
or-
these guys, because I actually,
like,
I just
what's
built
the air
this, I haven't
flow?
actually made anything with it yet.
Haven't had your aneurysm yet, eh?
Yeah.
The bottom.
Does it generate a wind pattern in there that it sucks stuff in, or throws material? Or?
Yeah, a little bit, but not a lot that I ever found. The biggest issue is probably in finishing, because with open segmented, how do you finish it? Because you have to finish the wood that's inside the hall, inside the open space. If you just slop it on, it's going to run down the piece and run into the hole, and then your holes are going to be all filled up with finish. So you have to kind of do the dance. Do I spray it? How much do I spray? Do I brush it on and then turn it up really fast and try to blow it out? And you'll try all of those little things until something, and the type of finish you use works.
Well, when you're cutting your segments, the inside surface is very difficult to get to. And what part of that is your bar stock or your blank? Is that where the saw does the cut? Is that end grain in there? I'm saying that what you could do is take
The
all
inside
your
is ingrained.
and could you finish them outside of the turning, then glue them in?
When you're putting ring on top of ring, that's flat on flat.
Okay.
But in between, it's all
Yeah.
end grain.
And gray.
Could you finish the end grain before you glue it into the structure?
No.
Why?
Well, considering when you look at some of Glenn's pieces, that piece of wood is less than 1/8 of an inch thick and maybe 1/8 of an inch wide.
Well, he's got a steady hand.
No, so I can see issues with, if you try to finish the piece, you're gonna get finish in the wood, then you're gonna try to cut the wood and you're gonna try to glue it. The biggest thing you have to remember with segmented is it's not just any kind of glue. You have to go to a really good quality glue. You don't go buy white glue or carpenter's glue, even Lee Valley's, the brown glue, the cabin maker's glue, which is an extremely good glue, but its drying time is so long, you can't use it in segmented work. I can't use it in a class
Yeah.
because it doesn't tack up fast.
Yeah. What glue do you use?
What do you use on it? You can use,
Yeah, I usually use Type Bond 3.
Type Bond is what the segmenting world uses. I have used a variety of them. I've even used a fast set. That's really tricky to use because it does dry up too quick. But if you use even, the white.
There's the Type Bond makes a trim glue, which is
Yeah,
just
no, that's
like,
way too thick.
way too thick?
No.
Because that
the
attacks
number-
fast.
Number one, Type Bond 1 is simply a good wood glue. 2 and 3 both have water protected characteristics. No, none of them are waterproof. Because when I do segmented, and you've got your band clamp around when I do close, the regular segment.
Close, yeah.
You're using band clamps to hold everything together. They're all covered in glue. I just take them, I throw them in a bucket, I put a little dish soap in it and some water, and I soak them for a couple of days. That glue peels off of that band clamp, no issue at all. And it's supposed to be waterproof.
But the trick is you're soaking it for a couple of days, you'll see that what Type Bond 3 says, not for continuous immersion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
So,
also getting rained on, but that's okay.
yeah, another thing you maybe mentioned too, like, when you're doing the glue up, you don't want a heck of a lot of glue squeeze out as well.
That's right, yeah,
Because
yeah,
you got a very tiny spot to clean out.
yeah.
But I usually just buy cheap pipe cleaners to clean up in
Clean up
between a little bit.
as you go.
But you can't do it sort of right away because you'll move your pieces as well, so
Yeah,
you have to let them tack up a little bit.
yeah,
That also goes to the finishing problem
Yeah.
too. You get that glue on something you want to put finish on later on, you got problems. You're gonna have splotchiness.
and do you guys, I've, on YouTube and stuff, I've seen where they use like a palette knife to put the glue onto the edges of the open segments?
Most of the time, I've either used my finger or like a little matchstick.
Okay, Yeah.
When I do open, it's
Yeah.
really a third of a matchstick,
yeah,
because you just want to put a
A little
little
bit.
drop on.
yeah.
I used to use a little brush, so one of those little solder brushes.
yeah.
whatever.
Okay.
But the biggest thing, once you have that made, doing open segmented, you have a lot of freedom because there's a gap in between each segment.
Yeah,
So if you screw that up a thou as you go around, like if you're putting 48, nobody sees it, it all works out in the wash. When you're doing closed segment, like the first one Gary showed in the book, you know, you're talking cutting pieces too, less than, you know, a thou by if you want them to work. They have to be extremely accurately cut. Open segmented, they don't have to be as accurate. They have to be accurate, but not dead on.
yeah.
Well, isn't there a cheating method you get on solid segmenting? If you glue the two half rings together with a dowel in between them, let the glue dry, and then touch those open faces on a flat sanding disc, then glue them in. All the errors are drawn together at the two joints.
There's an umpteen number of ways to flatten a closed segmented ring before they're glued together. Some of them are very simple,
Mhm.
and some of them, people go to the nth degree and don't get it any further than that.
Yeah,
You know. But cutting the segments is probably as detailed or more detailed than he took to make the jig.
Mm.
If you're gonna have a properly made product,
yeah.
as Glenn can attest.
So it's a precision job, all right. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, so I that's it for me.
Any questions for Dave? Beyond what we've already gone through? He's still married.
Barely. Barely.
Lobotomy scars almost healed.